Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and at this point in time, there is less than 24 hours until Shadowlands launches, and we have something to talk about. Over the past, I would say, 24 to 48 hours or so, give or take a little bit, there's been a pretty big shift in, I guess, the Covenant alignments of many classes, and one of those classes, and uh, it's Warlock. So today in this video, I want to talk to you guys about basically Kyrian versus Night Fae, Venthyr and Nephro Lord. This is more or less going to be a video talking about like one Covenant. If you're looking at playing all three specs in a rating setting, Mythic Plus setting, a mix of, Castle Nathria and Mythic Plus. I have to say that the actual guides we put out talking about, this being the best spec for this being the best spec for that, for the most part, that's still pretty much accurate. Kyrian is still very good for destruction because you can have Scouring Tithe. It's still very good for single target affliction because you get extra rapture damage from the dot being there. And I mean, it's still basically in the same place for Necrolord. The big thing with Covenant choice, if you're planning on playing more than one spec, which I always encourage people to do to learn every spec they can play of their class, is choosing the best universal Covenant. And it's sort of been back and forth between Kyrian and Night Fae. Night Fae excels more in AoE and is very close single target wise comparatively to in a few specs and builds and things. Kyrian was a little better single target and can be havoc with Destro, but it wasn't very good in AoE unless you can make good use of the shards you got back. And depending on what spec you're playing and the setting you're in, it wasn't necessarily the easiest. So let's talk a bit about what changed and then, well, what my plans are for launch tomorrow. So taking a look at the changes to a lot of classes over the last 24 to 48 hours, there's been a big shift, I guess, technically a week or so. A lot of this has been in the last 48. A lot of classes have shifted either from Kyrian to Night Fae or added Night Fae as a viable choice, whether it be Aff, Destro Demo, Rep, Peleus, Frost Mages, whatever, what have you. Now, a lot of this is due to the raw power from the Soulbinds that Night Fae bring comparatively to what Kyrian brings. Now, Pelagos was nerfed, but when you're looking at the actual Pelagos nerfs, the thing is that, okay, to be fair, so is Clea. Her actual combat, her strike ability, Valiant Strikes, have been nerfed a bit too. But Pelagos was the front runner for Kyrian pretty much the entire time. They did nerf Lekko of the Past, making it, or I guess, changing it from a versatility increase to basically a damage reduction, which is big. However, that is towards the very bottom of the actual Soulbind tree. Combat meditation, for the most part, I mean, it's still there. It's still a substantial mastery increase. The mastery orbs are relevant. Combat meditation may only occur once every minute. Scouring Tithe is a 45-second cooldown, but essentially, well, I mean, to be fair, like, you can refresh it for 40 seconds, I'm sorry, but you can refresh it basically every 18, as long as the target doesn't die. Comparatively to Pelagos really being the only good Soulbind that Kyrian has, comparatively to Night Fae having three really good Soulbinds. Corian's first ability here, Wild Hunt Tactics, which this is almost like the least impressive ability out of all three Soulbinds here, which is pretty crazy. It just straight up says you deal 10% more damage to targets above 75% health. So comparatively to other Warlocks in your raid, barring like them playing different traits and different gearing, you're basically just dealing 10% more damage than them for the first quarter of the fight. If ads are spawning and you're getting this more often, well, it puts you in a pretty good spot. Looking at actual Naya though, I'm not really sure how to pronounce this. She has two really good abilities. Her poison ability here is actually pretty strong. You interrupt supply paralytic poison to your target, inflicting nature damage over half a minute. Targets with the paralytic poison take an additional 301 nature damage if interrupted once more. It's solid. Obviously requires interrupting things. One of the bigger abilities here though, probably the most exciting part about this, is actually Grove Invigoration. Healing or dealing damage to the chance to grant you a stack of redirected anima. Redirected anima increases your maximum health by 1% and your mastery by 25 per half a minute, and the stacks overlap. The interesting thing here is that Soul Rot grants you 8 stacks of redirected anima. Soul Rot is a 1-minute ability. Now, if you watch the Destro Demo or Aff guides, we'll pop it right here, watch for the debuff, or buff, bam, there it is, a 200 mastery increase, and an 8% max health increase. If you watch the Destro Demo or Aff guides that I put out, we've talked about Soul Rot being pound for pound the hardest hitting ability out of Scouring Tithe, out of Impending Catastrophe for Venthyr, and obviously Soul Rot itself. Now, the main differences here is that Kyrian with Scouring Tithe is basically a permanent dot that you can keep up, because if the target doesn't die, you can refresh it. So looking at like a single target affliction build, it adds a bit more rapture value if you're rapturing outside of your singularity windows, a bit more consistent damage. But it doesn't hit as hard as Soul Rot does. Soul Rot is an 8-second cast, though, or an 8-second dot. It's not a permanent dot. It hits pretty hard. Soul Rot has a lot of extra added value when it comes to AoE, because it'll put basically a hard-hitting dot on your main target, and a not as hard of a hitting dot, but still a pretty substantial dot on 3 surrounding targets. And it will deal a big amount of damage in AoE, whether it's in Mythic Plus or Rating alike. There are a handful of fights here, looking at, for example, looking at Sun King Salvation, Sun Kings, even like Huntsman Altimore, a bit of cleave, you can cleave on Dark Vein. This actually lines up pretty well with add waves on Dark Vein as well, as long as they're stacked close enough, which they should be. At the same time, Stone Legion also has, it's a pretty stacked boss, at least like phase 1, and repeat phase 1 to get to the final phase. And Sire the Nathrius in phase 1 and potentially even phase 2. There's a lot of potential for like stacked cleave, which Soul Rot excels at. And that's not even including the actual Grove Invigoration ability here, which, like I said, is really strong. It is a 200 mastery increase comparatively to Kyrian giving you baseline 350 from Scouring Tide with combat meditation. And you also don't have the orbs here. But one of the things here with this is that you actually get a health increase, which might not seem like a whole lot, but what works really well and really awkwardly with health increases, like talking earlier back in beta with stamina kits, demonology, and demonic consumption. Your max health being increased, your pets are going to have more health, you're going to siphon more health for the amount of consumption, and it lines up really pretty well every minute with other CDs and things too. Not just looking at Demo, but looking at like Affliction with Dark Soul or Destro with, you know, other CDs, depending what you're doing. It's just solid, and you're not waiting for any kind of like minute 8-second window like you are with Scouring Tide because of weird like overlaps and the 1 minute DR on combat meds actual mastery increase. Looking even further into this though, excluding the actual first trait here being Growth Invigoration, getting in the Dreamweaver, once again, I don't really know why Dreamweaver is still in the state that she is. She is the only actual Soulbind in the game right now that unlocks double potency conduit on the week that Mythic Nathria opens. It requires Renown 13. Every other Soulbind in the game is, I believe, week 7 or beyond. She gets it like 2 or 3 weeks, I think 3 weeks before everybody else. It's pretty insane. Now, her first ability here is Pod Tender. When you take damage that would kill you, instead rejuvenate within a Wild Seed. Basically, it's a cheat death. If Wild Seed takes more than X damage over time, you die. It's pretty much cheat death, which is actually pretty relevant in Mythic Plus, in rating, even in PvP. Just solid. But looking at the final ability here she has as well, Field of Blossoms. Soul Rot puts flowers at your feet for 10 seconds that increase your haste by 12 when you stand within them. Now, obviously, this is like, it's important to keep in mind this trait is not going to be acquired until much later, renown-wise, but Night Fae has so much going for it. Looking at almost every Soulbind you have here, whether it's Korain, early Wild Hunt tactics, Grove Invigoration, double potency conduit, Kyrian really has Pelagos, which is solid, but then you don't really have a whole lot else here. And like I said in the actual start of this video, one of the bigger things when it comes to choosing a Covenant, if you're looking at playing multiple specs from a progression standpoint, higher end progression, whatever, what have you, is looking at the fights, like looking at how each individual fight works, breaks down what Covenant could or will bring more to that fight, and what Covenant is like the best overall universal Covenant for that scenario. Now, there have been a couple of sims that have emerged. I will say some of the actual profiles of APLs don't look completely optimized. The actual, like, I guess, creator of these sims said himself, I'll put a link in the description if you guys want it, or you can just copy it here. It's not very hard to disregard some of them because you can tell which ones that aren't working, obviously. He ended up using a mage legendary for a few of them because he runs normally mage ones, but it's fine. I can point those out to you. For the most part, looking at the actual Soulbind abilities here, looking at 13, 16, and 19. We'll go Affliction, 1 target. Is Pelagos ahead? Yeah, he's ahead by a little bit, about 100 or so DPS, but you have Naya, you have Night Fae, Naya right here. You have Dreamweaver here. This is actually showing Dreamweaver with double potency conduit, and this is showing her with her other ability. I believe, what's it called? Social Butterfly, which I guess is one of these tabs somewhere here. But it's connected to an actual endurance conduit and not a potency conduit. So technically it's there. I believe it sims with a 50% uptime on the versatility increase. It's not bad, but keep in mind, I mean, this is also available pretty early as well. If for whatever reason double potency gets nerfed, hey, Social Butterfly is still there, and it's still pretty pretty decent. So, I mean, getting back to the actual sims here, is Pelagos ahead? Yes, he's ahead by a little bit in pure single target. But these are affliction sims. Let's look at Destro sims, for example. Destro sims. Ameni's ahead, which we talked about. As far as like Necro being good for Destro, it is. But then Naya's ahead of Kyrian right here by about, I don't know, give or take like 50, 60 DPS. And Dreamweaver's right there too. Dreamweaver's like 30 or so behind. Like, it's still really close here. But adding in what Soul Rot brings you, because looking at what Scouring Tide does for destruction, let's say Destro, for example. Yes, you can Havoc Scouring Tide. I can go put up Scouring Tide on... I can go put up Havoc on one target, for example, and then put Scouring Tide on both. And it's really cool because if one dies with Scouring Tide on it, I'll end up getting the 5 shards. And if the other one doesn't, it will reset the cooldown of Scouring Tide. And the extra, like, I guess the bigger bonus there is that if there's a target like here, like this one and here, for example, you won't hit them both with Soul Rot, but you can Havoc both of them with Kyrian Scouring Tide. So technically for Destro 2 target, okay, Scouring Tide is probably a little bit ahead. But when it comes to single target, Soul Rot's ahead. When it comes to larger AoE, unless you're like using the shards from Scouring Tide pretty well, which can be easy at times or harder at times, Soul Rot's going to be ahead. If you're looking at actual Affliction, for example, okay, once again, in the Sims, we can pull up Afsol once again. I mean, like, it's ahead by a little bit. But if you looked at like AoE Sims, I mean, it's like Soul Rot's so far ahead because Scouring Tide doesn't really have a whole lot of like AoE implications for Affliction. Like, you can put it up, and yes, it will give you the actual combat meditation buff, which indeed, as long as you haven't procced the 1-minute ICD on it, which is a decent bit of mastery, and you can get some orb spawning. But at the same time, like we mentioned, if you're playing Kaya, or Naya, you actually get Grove Invigoration at 8 stacks guaranteed. And this also stacks, potentially, depending if you get lucky or not, outside of combat. You can get stacks of Grove Meditation, or not outside of combat, but outside of like your Soul Rot window. You can still get stacks just casting your actual spells. So there's that. Now, obviously, you have the Soul Shape ability versus the Kyrian Flask ability. And in the end, I mean, hey, Soul Shape has a bit of extra mobility tied to it. It's not really going to make or break things, but technically it is there. And technically, hey, it does work in the Maw, so there's that too. But being real, they have changed the way that a lot of bleed effects work and what the actual Kyrian Vial does in Castle Nathria. So Soul Shape could be a relevant ability. It's basically it is the same speed increase as Burning Rush. You can blink 2 or 3 times, moving forward more. It's just solid, and I'm just amazed that the actual Dreamweaver changes haven't really been put in either. But even without those being put in, even without shifting the potency conduit away from like second potency at rank 14, Naya is still up there. Like, she's still up there. Grove Invigoration is still pretty good. If you get under the actual poison ability here and can use this quite frequently, it's also pretty solid. Even taking a look at what Soulbind traits, like sim wise, you have at one target, let's say one target Affliction, for example. Now, once again, keep in mind the sims APLs probably could be like optimized a bit more, but at this point there's still a bit of work in progress. But from what I've tested on my own and talked to other Warlocks about, these do seem to be pretty accurate from what we've seen in our own gameplay. Once again, single target, Kyrian Pelagos is ahead by a little bit. If you go to 3 target looking at Soulbinds, it's not even close, man. It's not even close. Naya and Dreamweaver are ahead of Pelagos by 400 or so DPS. Like, I mean, that's just the power of what they bring and the power of Soul Rot and everything else. Like, and what is AF good at? I mean, AF is probably going to be at this current point in time, tuning wise, like our main single target spec, but there's not a huge difference here. Like, it's 100 DPS, which is a bit, but it's not the end of the world. It's not the end all be all. And depending on how certain fights are built, like, it's about finding the best universal covenant. Not every single fight in Nathria is going to be pure single target. There's only 4. You have Sludge Fist, Artificial Ironic, Hungering Destroyer, and I forgot the 4th one. Sludge Fist, Hungering Destroyer, Artificial Ironic, and Shriekwing, the first boss, obviously. But outside of that, like, you have like solid 2-target cleave on Huntsman Baltimore, big cleave on Sun Kigs, potentially big cleave on Dark Vein. You can cleave on Council of Blood. It's sort of single target in disguise, but decent cleave on Stone Legion and decent cleave on Sire Denathrius. Like, the fights structurally, mechanically, are built in a way that Soul Rot could excel in these fights. To a similar extent, Soul Rot is not really an ability you have to maintain and juggle like you do necessarily Scouring Tide. You, for the most part, hit your Soul Rot every minute or so. The damage is dealt, and you move on with life. It might not be necessarily as great pure single target, but when you look at like AoE fights, like I just mentioned, we're going into Mythic Plus, the damage is just so much better than Scouring Tide, unless it's a very, very niche scenario. And once again, it's about finding the best Covenant overall for everything. We've already talked about, there are no demo sims here, but we've already talked about what Covenants are good for Demonology. If you're going like pure single target, okay, look at Neck for a Lord. But if you're looking at like AoE, or even just like an ability that's good single target outside of Neck for a Lord, Decimating Bolt, Night Fae is right there. We put Night Fae number 2 as far as Demonology is concerned. We put Night Fae number 2 as far as Affliction was concerned. And we put I think we put Night Fae number 3 as far as Deshra was concerned. It might be a little better. It's probably around number 2. Deshra is interesting because, once again, like, if you're playing Deshra, you're probably getting used to Havoc and Scouring Tithe, and also Nephra Lord, once again, is, as you can see here, Nephra Lord, even Soulbind-wise, is pretty good for Deshra single target. Looking at actual conduits, or Covenant abilities here, too. Let's go Deshra 1 target. Raw Covenant abilities. Nephra Lord's ahead by a bit, but then there's Night Fae here. Basically, Night Fae and like there's Night Fae and there's Kyrian. Like there's a bit of a difference, but Night Fae's ahead. If you go at looking at raw Covenant abilities here for Affliction, okay, like we said, you know, Kyrian's ahead by a little bit, but Night Fae's right here. It's less than a 100 DPS difference. If it's better for Destro than a Kyrian is, in a sense, if it's better for Demo than looking at both AoE and single target, I think the choice here just becomes clearer and clearer for the most part, you know? If you're looking at just playing one spec, what we talked about in the guides, I think is still on point. But if you're looking at playing one overall, Universal Covenant, taking into consideration just the power level of what Kyrian does, single target, and AoE, because keep in mind, the Soul Rot ability deals twice the amount of damage to your like primary target that it does to all the other surrounding targets. When they nerfed Kyrian, Venthyr, and Necrolord like a month and a half ago, Soul Rot, I think Soul Rot was buffed that day. Or it might have been nerfed like a tiny bit, but then they added on the primary target taking double damage effect. So like Soul Rot is just a strong all-around ability. It's more or less set it and forget it. But what it brings pound for pound is strong. And if you're looking at one overall, like just best all-around Covenant, being real, I think Night Fae is probably going to be where you want to be, whether you like it or not. Oh, by the way, the Drain Life part of this, you don't hit it. In Mythic Plus, you still play Drain Soul. You don't play ID. You still don't cast Drain Life for any kind of... There's no scenario where you press Drain Life with Soul Rot, unless for whatever reason you're low on life, you need to press Drain Life in the first place. You don't mess it. Don't even press it. It's still not good. Now, one of the big questions I'm probably going to get here is that, hey, Kala, I'm not really in a high-end raiding guild. I don't really care a whole lot about getting my second potency conduit week 4 versus week 7 if I'm looking at the grand scheme of things, the big picture. And the thing is, when it comes to all this, we really don't know what's going to happen in the big picture, because there's going to be tuning heroic week. There typically always is. Chances are decent you'll probably see some kind of tuning before the raid even opens, and you might see some after the first week of Mythic. So they could very well end up moving a few abilities around, buffing things, nerfing things. We'll take that as it comes. That could be something that happens all the way down the line heading into like 9.1 PTR testing, but we'll see where it goes. After progression's over, you can sort of swap around Covenants. There is a renowned catch-up mechanic from what we know. I don't believe we know everything about it, but it should help you catch up and sort of gear different Covenants based around what you think could be best in 9.1, and then we go from there. But looking at launch and how things are for, well, Castle Nathria and early Mythic Plus, all of that, at this current point in time, once again, I will say things could change. So I would encourage you, shameless plug here, but really, I would encourage you to check in on stream tomorrow when launch is going on to make sure I'm still choosing this Covenant. At this current point in time, I would say taking everything into account, into consideration, what Night Fae gets you, whether you're looking at double potency, whether you're looking at Grove Invigoration, whether you're looking at playing Korin, I guess at least it's like a week 5 unlock or whatever, but whether you're looking at double potency, you're looking at Grove Invigoration, or you're looking at just pound for pound what Soul Rot does single target, as well as AoE. We talked about it for a while. Soul Rot is indeed our best, like, just straight up damage ability. It will deal more damage than Venthyr, Necrolord, and Kyrian. It does good single target damage. It does good AoE damage. The others are a bit more niche and better in certain settings, and worse than others. Soul Rot is that ability that you just hit, and it's good. It's fine. everywhere. And you can't really say the same for Venthyr. Venthyr is so bad single target right now, you don't even hit it. Kyrian is okay, but it's not as much damage. You can have it get, but you can't really, apply it in like an AoE setting. And Neckford Lord, I mean, it depends what you're doing. For Destro, like, yeah, it's actually not bad. It's pretty good. For Demo, it's good single target, but there's no AoE implications. And for Affliction, well, they gutted that 8 times a month and a half ago, and the Covenant is terrible. There's a pretty good, I mean, look, I think Neckford Lord, to be fair, has the highest potential upside if they buff it, because it is a pretty strong interaction with Drain Soul and other legendary effects and conduits and things. But at this current point in time, it's sort of a lost cause. So, with that being said, at this current point in time, my plans tomorrow are to go Night Fae, and we'll see what tuning brings. Now, I'm not saying that Kyrian's bad. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're looking at just playing Destro, or just Demo, or just AF, or just one spec, and not looking at being a jack of all trades, playing multiple specs in different settings, I would still pretty much follow what the guides say. If there's one thing that you should take away from this, in this video, and everything heading into release and things tomorrow, is that there are still multiple options. These are directly from the Wowhead guides. I talked to Lucy, and I talked to Zyronic. I talk to them probably once a week, maybe a little bit less, Zyro. I still love you, but I know you're a busy big dog. Either way, Kyrian is still a good choice for Destro. Necrolord is technically probably still better. It is probably still better than Night Fae for demonology single target, and it's not as good for AoE, but it's there. And Night Fae might be a tiny bit worse pure single target for Affliction when it comes to Kyrian, or comparatively to Kyrian, but it's also a strong contender at AoE. I put it higher at AoE than Kyrian here for Affliction, and it's still good for Destro, pound for pound single target. There are options. So if there's one thing you really take away from this, guys, is that Night Fae is not the end all be all. If you're not really playing, it's hard to put it into terms. What I've been saying on stream for a long time, if you truly enjoy min-maxing your character, awesome. That's great. I enjoy the same thing. If you're not in a guild that's going for world first, or I guess to put it into more of a general sense, if you're not in a guild that's going for Hall of Fame, or a guild that has a set goal to be X rank, or has like a solid goal in mind, play what you want. Basically, if your guild doesn't care what you play, you shouldn't care either. If your plus group doesn't care what you play, you shouldn't care either. Because chances are high, if your group cares, if your guild cares, there's probably a common goal in mind. If you want to bring the best, most optimized version of your class, or your spec, or your warlock, however you want to word it, into it, okay, take this into account. But if you enjoy Venthyr more than Night Fae, or if you enjoy Neckford Lore more than Night Fae, you're looking at playing a spec where it might not seem the best, in the end, if you're not trying to push higher end content, play what you want. It's not going to make or break things. And when it comes down to it, in the end, it's a game. Enjoy what you're playing. Enjoy the game. If it means playing Venthyr, which is not recommended barely anywhere here because they gutted Venthyr, at least for us, looks like they gutted it for most everybody else. Play what you want. Play the Covenant you want, and just enjoy the game. Just enjoy the game. If you care about min-maxing, that's what you live for, okay, then go for it. Then Night Fae is your best choice overall, looking at all 3 specs. But if you want to play Venthyr and just have fun, go for it. That's one of the biggest things I think people have missed when it comes to all of alpha and beta testing and just all of that. Just have fun, guys. Just have fun. But if you're talking, in my case, my plan at this current point in time is Night Fae. With all that being said, guys, thanks for watching. I hope this video gave you all a better understanding of why I decided to shift from Kyrian to Night Fae with less than 48 hours, I guess less than 24 hours before launch at this point. Now, once again, like I just said, I want to emphasize that if you're not trying to min-max everything, if you're not in a guild or a group for Mythic Plus, or whatever you're doing in the game that has like a common goal in mind, that's trying to push a higher end progression, I want to emphasize, play the Covenant that you want. Have fun in the game. If you don't like Night Fae in the slightest and want to be a Neckford Lord or a Venthyr, go for it. If endgame, higher end endgame progression is not really what you have in mind, you want to play it more for cosmetics, go for it. That's having fun in the game. Everybody has fun in different ways, and it's important to, do what you think is the most fun. So keep that in mind. But once again, with that being said, dudes, I want to thank all you guys for everything. This is probably going to be the last video that I put out until Shadowlands drops. I'm not stopping. Listen to what I said. Until Shadowlands drops. It drops in about 20 hours from now. I want to thank you guys so much for all the support over the course of alpha into beta. Just things have been insane for the channel, for YouTube, for Twitch. I really just appreciate it so much, dudes. Thank you so much. Any WeakAuras profiles or add-ons you've seen here are indeed available on my Twitch. If you want to swing by and grab them, ask any questions, hang out anytime. I'll be streaming launch as long as everything goes according to plan. Feel free to do so. Boys, let me know what you think of these changes, of this build, of playing a Night Fae Warlock. That's hard to say, in the comment section below. Any questions, drop them there, and I'll be sure to get back to you. If you guys want to see more content, be sure to smash the subscribe button below and hit that like button while you're down there. Thanks again so much, dudes, and I will catch you all again in Shadowlands soon. Peace.